All right. Good afternoon to most of you. Good morning to, I don't know, do we have anybody in Alaska or Hawaii? If we do, good morning, good welcome. And welcome to our fourth in our series of, there we go. Thank you, Heather. We're repping Alaska 4 hours behind, still in the morning out there. But wanting to welcome everyone to our fourth in our series of leadership and management during turbulent times. I really want to, before we dive into the content today around crisis communication and media and some of these other things, which I'm very excited for. I think it's an incredibly important conversation and topic. I want to also just acknowledge that we're in a little bit of a crisis mode right now with things going on in Washington, D.C. So wanted to give a little bit of an update just for folks to be aware of where we stand and where things are going. Um, and also a couple things that you can do. So I think everybody's aware of this, but the short reality is that there is funding, federal funding is set to expire at on midnight tomorrow. So what is that? About 32 and a half hours that we have until that happens. The Congress is working to try to negotiate and figure out some sort of pathway forward. The House passed a continuing resolution which would extend funding for Head Start from last year, basically at flat levels. We would be getting flat funding for the next year. And there's also, although it's not what's called a clean CR, it does make some other changes to the process and to the overall federal funding. Democrats are upset by that, by some of those changes, and as a result of that, it did pass the House basically on a party line vote. There was one Republican that voted against it, one Democrat that voted in favor of it. That happened on Tuesday, and then there's going to be a vote set up in the Senate tomorrow on that continuing resolution. We believe that that continuing resolution will fail. We do not think that the Senate is going to approve it, although we don't know at this stage of the game of where things stand. Our message over this whole time has just been very, very clear and very, very specific, is that we need stability in funding and funding decisions. We do not want to see a shutdown. We also, though, want to see, at the very minimum, a funding increase of in line with inflation. We want to see a cost of living adjustment, I should say, in line with inflation. And that is what we have been pushing. We would, at this point, again, that continuing resolution that passed the House and is going to be voted on in the Senate does have flat funding, not the end of the world, but it not great. And so from that perspective, we do want to ask everyone to take action. Reach out to your members of Congress, pass this on to your staff, to others. It is not doing a specific lobbying activity in terms of telling them to vote one way or the other on the bill. However, it is asking them to vote in favor of basically, well, not vote in favor. It's asking them to include funding in line with the cost of living adjustment that we suggest and that we recommend. So thank you for putting that out there. Once you're done submitting that to your members of Congress, please pass that on to your team, pass that on to friends and family. If we get everybody who's here to send it on to three other people, we're going to be getting, I mean, almost 1,000 of letters that get sent up to Congress. So maybe a little bit less than that. My math might be wrong, but either way, making a big thing. In terms, question, do you suggest we email more than once, or once it's done, it's enough? You can submit it once per day if you want. That's really up to you. The biggest thing is actually just getting more people to send that letter. So I think if you already submitted it, do pass, try to see if you can find two more people to send a letter, three more people to send it up, and that would be very, very helpful. We'll continue to update everyone over email about this. We'll send out our NHSA in Action newsletter that will have additional updates as we have them tomorrow. And if it does look like there's going to be a shutdown, we are talking about doing some sort of a stand-up call or something like that, kind of an emergency call tomorrow evening. So late afternoon or evening, depending on what the Senate does tomorrow and what happens in the next few hours, next few days. So that's the by way of background. The other just business item that I wanted to ask everyone for, I think you probably acknowledged this by now, but as we're now in our fourth of our series, we wanted to acknowledge that Dr. B and I have been, and Courtney and the team have been really intentionally not not coming up with a plan for like the entire 4 month period about what each of these sessions will be. And as I said, intentionally on that, because we want to hear what you need. We want to hear what are the things that you're struggling with, what are the things that are making you nervous, what are the things that are making it really hard to manage in a time of crisis, in a time of turbulence, these types of things. And I think that was really helpful in setting the stage for our initial conversations. Obviously, our first one in December was much broader about leadership in times of crisis, but we heard that immigration and curiosity about what migrant seasonal programs were doing was an important thing. That's why we did that in January. In February, we focused on community partnerships, how to engage community partnerships and build systems together, joint intake systems. Great presentation from Tammy Mann in Alexandria, Virginia, and some of her colleagues. And then we also were hearing, hey, we're getting a lot of press calls, we're getting a lot of media, we're not sure what do we need to do to communicate to get the word out. And so not only did we decide to do this session, we also hired somebody to help us do this. So it is my extreme honor and excitement to introduce you to today's speaker, Lauren Lawson-Zilai, who is on day 12 of working for NHSA. Already a seasoned veteran because she's joining at quite the sprint time. This is not even her first major presentation to the Head Start community. But I will just say, getting to know Lauren throughout the interview process, as well as just in the last 12 days of working with her, she brings quite an impressive resume, a skill set, a dedication that fits perfectly with Head Start. Lauren worked for many years at Goodwill Industries, supporting their communications efforts, navigating through some crisis scenarios, and I'm sure she'll even talk about some of her past crisis experience and really navigating the media. And we're, if she's able to keep doing, no pressure, Lauren, on this, able to keep doing what she's done over the last 12 days, I have no doubt that Head Start's voice and communications are going to be even more effective than they have been in the past. And so please join me in welcoming Lauren to help us manage turbulent times.
Thank you, Tommy, and thank you all for being here. I know I met a few of you, so if you were on my call last week, thanks for being here again. Like Tommy said, I have a background in crisis communications. I've lived in the DC area for more than 20 years. I've been in PR for 25 years and have 20 plus years in nonprofit and social impact. So led communications for Goodwill, again, Children's Defense Fund as well. It's a great honor to be here because I feel really passionate about children and families and issues that impact them. I am a member of several boards and advisory groups, two of those being iHeart and NBC Washington in the DC area, which is always a benefit because it gives me a chance to talk about the causes that are important to me. And I've done my fair share of interviews, and I hope that you can connect with me. So I've put my LinkedIn link at the bottom. So this is going to be a high-level presentation about crisis and media. I know we're in really turbulent, uncertain times, and I want to be sure that I'm equipping you all with this type of training. That being said, I know you all have different needs. You're in different localities. You have different size teams. So this will be high level. And per the chat, you will receive the recording and the slideshow and some follow-up resources after today. And I encourage you all to practice on your own and contact me should you need tip sheets or other resources. I will be pausing at each section and then looking at the comments in the chat and answering questions as best I can as we go through this. So this is a comprehensive agenda. You can go back one. We really want to have you develop the strategic skills necessary to handle crisis management with credibility in the first hour, month, and year. So you are prepared pre and post crisis. We want to determine who should be on your crisis response team and what their role is, the best practices for crisis, media preparation, controlling the narrative, key messages, talking points, types of questions that you'll get in playing nice interviews or questionable interviews where you might be on the spot, general tools, techniques for you, the types of formats that you'll have with interviews. So there are different types of media, and then hopefully we'll get into Q&A. So I just wanted to offer this lighthearted slide because I have had my fair share of crises in the work environment, including embezzlement, protests, loss of life, some really serious issues. And it always feels like crises happen on a Friday, that you get a call or you see something online at 4 or 5 o'clock, and it can impact your organization's image, your credibility. But hopefully we can turn some of those crises into opportunities, and we can focus on the reality. So the reality is that we used to have 24 hours to respond in a crisis, and that really depending on the news cycle. So the phrase 24/7 news cycle is no longer a novel issue, but a way of life. And I think you all know that. People thought that was a short timeline when we had more time, and that you managed your response through media and key stakeholders. And once the crisis was over, that was it. But these days, the news cycle never stops. A crisis could start on any number of platforms, and you all need to know how to respond practically and immediately through integrated channels. We know that X, there's a lot of conversation on there. Things can go live seconds after something happens, before you might even know something has happened. And then it spreads like wildfire and spirals into a full-blown crisis. So oftentimes there's no filter. It's really hard to stop an image or a message being circulated in a very rapid fashion. And there's a lot of twists and turns and unpredictability. Uh, we also know that everyone's a spokesperson, so everyone has an opinion. Whereas we didn't have control with crisis communications in the past, we have even less now. So much like you can't control a fire, but you can manage it, the same goes for a crisis, especially online. But what has stayed the same and stayed true is that you need to be cool-headed and strategic and anticipate various outcomes. So I do want to start with what's an issue versus what's a crisis. And Melissa Agnes, who I follow, is an international crisis and reputation management expert. She's a keynote speaker and author of the book Crisis Ready. And her definition, which I would agree with, is an issue and a crisis both have very different meanings, but also very different management responses. An issue is an identified event or trend where you are afforded the time to research the facts and ensure nothing has been overlooked. And a crisis, by definition, is outside normal experience. It causes top executives to drop everything they are doing, and it requires you to be out front. A crisis can also last longer than a day's bad news. So there are different types of crises. There is an immediate crisis that could be a natural disaster or other major emergency type, such as an earthquake, a fire, crime, an accident. There is often very little opportunity for specific research and planning with that. However, a general plan can be put in place and implemented to reduce damage and enhance the situation. And I do want to add that I will be sending you a sample plan after today, so that will be able to help you moving forward. Emerging crises are those that allow for more time for analysis and specific planning. They might include employee dissatisfaction, and you might have had that with an employee going live on social media, or opposition by various groups, or budget reductions. So these situations can be anticipated and minimized at early stages. And then there's sustained crises, which involve situations that won't go away and may linger for years. Dealing with a viral rumor is a prime example. So, thinking back into my previous life at Goodwill, we had a rumor called Think Before You Donate. And it said we had an owner by the name of someone who was never affiliated with Goodwill. It actually lasted 15 years. So it started off as an email, and then it morphed into a social graphic. And then media started sharing it as if it was true. So that can be really frustrating because we live in an archive society, and even something that is not true is virtually impossible to erase from a news outlet or other locations searchable through the internet. So the best solution is to stop these whenever possible. We have communication barriers. So there is communication confirmation bias where someone disputes hardcore evidence. And in this age of instant, constant communication, particularly via social media, it makes it very easy for like-minded people to find each other within milliseconds. And they reinforce each other's views by commenting, liking, or retweeting. And no matter what you say as an organization or as a person, they will try and dispute you. We all know some of the misconceptions that are out there about Head Start. Head Start is just daycare. Head Start is only for low-income families. Parents don't have to be involved in Head Start. And as leaders and communicators, we have to find creative and impactful ways to deliver fact-based clarity to the right audience at the right time through the right channels. And you have to break through the noise. So we're really living in an era of public mistrust, and we have to demonstrate unwavering commitment to integrity, transparency, and be authentic, especially as an association, a nonprofit. And if we're going to win back the trust and respect of the public, we have to present them with the right information and do so with civility. So there are four stages of a crisis that can be sparked very easily. So the first stage is the fact-finding stage, where you have to gather as much information as possible and find out the facts, the good and the bad, in order to assess the situation and determine how best to respond. And you have to acknowledge the situation at that time and ask people to bear with you. There's the amplification stage where you want to ensure you have the right messaging on all the right channels, including social media. And I know not all of you have social media, and multimedia if necessary. So there are ways that I can help you with that in the moment. And it's more important than ever to have a crisis communications plan. So I do want to be your partner with that if that's something that you don't want to have in-house. The other thing is emotions run high and people can point fingers, and it's really unacceptable to be silent at that time. You can't be scrambling to get a strategy together, especially if external stakeholders are speaking about you and saying things that are inaccurate about your brand. And then the last part is the rebuilding stage. So a crisis can force an organization or professional to rebrand, eliminate a dormant problem, look at your consent and release forms, modernize technology, adopt best practices, or achieve improved levels of compliance. And I think you all have been there as leaders of your organization. There are key triggers to a crisis. So, a smoldering crisis can differ from a sudden crisis. It can start as a minor internal issue that, due to negligence, develops to a crisis situation. These are situations where leaders are blamed for the crisis and its effect on the organization in question. A sudden crisis is a disruption in an organization's business that can occur without warning. Replay web, this is what I like to refer to as a social media crisis. So it means you're finding out in real time something that has happened before you have even been told it's happened. And then there's bad judgment, which could impact people or an organization's strategy and could cause personal injury, cost to your organization, or inflict minor damage on your reputation. So I will pause if there's any questions before I continue. I did see one comment. Okay. So in an ideal world, it's important to have a crisis communications plan and a team, and to assign roles and responsibilities to key players. I know that many of you manage small programs, so the executive director may be the comms person and the HR person. So I know I'm setting a high bar here, but don't be discouraged because it will take some time for your program to have this level of preparation. And I'm also an extension of your team as well. So you do want to assign each team member a role, and everyone should know what their job is should a crisis or disaster strike. And you should designate one person to speak to external publics, like the media, another to keep internal publics fully informed, like parents or staff. So you need to figure out who will be in charge of crafting a statement, who will man the social media channels if you have them. It's really helpful to have a sense of who will know and do these roles ahead of time so that you can avoid having a chaotic environment. You can go to the next slide. And by the time you figure that out, chances are people will be wondering what's taking so long, or worse, people will speak on your behalf. In the ideal scenario, it's also helpful if you can rehearse your crisis management team on a regular basis. And I've done this on a quarterly or yearly basis. And this enables you to train, retrain spokespeople, emphasize the need for them to work with others involved, and communicate and have clear messaging so that everyone is speaking with one tone and one voice. You want to be sure that you are developing a protocol and a plan. So as much as you have a plan for your crisis team and what you'll do internally, you should also be thinking about who do you want to have at the ready, because third parties are really credible. So having influencers at the ready, and I don't mean social media influencers, but partners, coalitions, local news celebrities, board members, people that you've worked with and really know, trust, and understand your brand, and ensure that they are equipped with resources such as stats and graphics. These are the individuals that have clout, that have significant followings, and really believe in your brand. So it's one thing to be passionate about your brand, but it's another to have that kind of validation where others are speaking on your behalf. You want to be sure that you have your internal communication very strong and as strong as your external comms. Employees will advocate for their brand if they're equipped with the right information, and especially if they have a personal tie-in to your brand. So ensure that they have the right messaging to do that. And then if necessary, and I know this may not be possible for everyone, but what I have seen success with is if you can have a web page that can go live So basically, it's a dark page that you're plugging in information, testimonials from parents and guardians, a video from a subject matter expert, a response letter, anything that can be collected in one place at one time that you can refer people to quickly. And then that can be an answer if you are getting questions from news or from social media. It's an effective way to explain a complex situation. And then finally, and I've shared this with state leaders, if you have a TV crew that is coming to you in a crisis situation that shows up at your door unexpected, you don't have to grant them an interview. You can set the tone on your own terms, and you can simply direct them to the statement. It depends on the situation. You also want to be conscious of, say there's a situation where someone is being accused of bringing in a high salary. You don't want to have that TV crew come into your office and to an office setting. You probably want to have more of a casual look, have a shirt on that says Head Start versus dressing in a suit and doing an interview on the outside of your office. So just think about the optics of something like that. So there are many crisis tips and best practices, and we will try to get through all of them today. But the biggest thing I can tell you is that the first hour of a crisis is often called the golden hour. And that's because most organizations fail. They fail because they don't recognize the potential for the explosive attention they're about to get. They fail because they don't have a well-defined crisis plan in place. Something I did at Goodwill is we had the ability to go off-site for a period of 2 or 3 days and write down every possible crisis situation scenario we could think of. And then we developed response statements and Q&A as part of that. So I know this is a really hectic time, but when there is the ability that you can afford to do that, I do encourage you to do so that you can plan ahead for as many scenarios as possible. There are 4 key areas for crisis planning. So you want to consider the actions that you'll take and the severity of the issue. Again, the first hour is the most important because you need to determine whether the situation will become a manageable problem or an out of control disaster. Some short-term response requirements include confirming roles like we talked about, confirming the facts, what happened, what are the immediate known consequences, what are the likely consequences of what could happen, what must be done in the next several hours and how, and then what human and material resources are available or needed. So you want to listen and adapt in that first hour. You want to gather your team, and you want to think about uh, whether this is, you can continue to the next slide. You also want to consider your holding statement and responding at the flashpoint. So that's the most important thing that I can emphasize to you. And the example I would give is if a teacher spoke inappropriately to a child and that became news, you recognize the situation, you indicate that you're researching the facts and you're looking into it, and you always demonstrate concern, that we are concerned about the parents and the faculty. We will continue to monitor and to look into this. So you do want to identify at the onset of a crisis, is it bad news or is it a crisis? How widely is it being covered? Who are your key stakeholders? Is it staff? Is it advocates? What are the next steps for media and the public? And then determine what you need to issue to any staff in terms of instructions. And I would say that's really important because I've been in crisis situations where the crisis team huddles, but then a staff member might get a call or an email or just a notification, and they don't know what's happening. So it's very helpful to be thinking about internal and external communications at the same time. The other thing is do what you say when you say it. So plan to communicate new information as soon as it's appropriate to do so. Make a timeline and commit to it, even if it's just to say you're still gathering information. Issue follow-up statements if needed. They should be short and factual and express concern, like I mentioned. And if you can, develop a social media friendly version of your holding statement. So sometimes holding statements may be 3 to 4 sentences, depending on the situation. For social media, you can say, we are trying our best to determine what exactly occurred and greatly appreciate your patience. You can find more updates here, and hopefully you can insert a link or another means to get information. And then it's important to put your audience first. So your messages should always be honest and transparent. You need to be credible and empathetic. You need to show emotion. Speak in plain English. So avoid using acronyms, jargon, corporate speak. Remember your social internet audiences and be as flexible as possible as you can. We do know that Google has taken over traditional media and search engines, and that tends to be a messenger. It provides the quickest and most easiest way to finding things online, which can be problematic. So that's why it's so important to have crisis statements. So with a crisis statement, you do want to say what will be remembered. Keep that in mind. You want to continue to revise the messaging as needed, but ensure consistency. Decide when messages should change or spokespeople should change. I'm a big proponent of having a subject matter expert, and there are some situations where it wouldn't be appropriate for the executive director to be the spokesperson. Perhaps it's the board chair or someone else. So keep that in mind. Again, honesty, transparency, show compassion, drive to get to the bottom of what happened. And then in a crisis statement, and this may be post-crisis, if you find that you are at fault or you caused the situation, acknowledge that and indicate what will happen again. So the steps that you'll take to rectify that. If it's a website takeover, you know, what processes are you putting in place? Avoid being defensive. That's just not going to serve you well. It will fan the flames. People will remember that. So ensure that you are factual. And then there are media inquiries. You're all dealing with them. There are proactive and reactive. So proactive is referring to initiating contact with the media. You all have good stories to tell right now, and I know it's hard to do that. But that's when you're pitching stories or information about your organization that you are aiming to control the narrative and shape positive coverage. While reactive media inquiries are when you respond to media requests that come to you, such as what will happen if there's a government shutdown, what will happen if Head Start closes. So it's in response to a news event or a crisis that directly affects your organization, and that requires you to address the situation as it unfolds. And I will pause again. I think that's just Zoom talking to us, but I'll pause again if there's any questions. All right. So, media preparation. It is important for you to think about when you're speaking to the media. Is this media outlet going to put you in front of your target audience? Is it a credible media outlet? Will you have a chance to share your key messages? And you can address inquiries as they come in with my assistance, especially if you may suspect that the outlet is not credible or that they just have the intent to really write a damning article about you. And in that case, I do want to work with you to help assess those situations on a case by case basis. So, with crises and media, I can't emphasize practicing enough. Practice makes perfect, whether it's a speech or media, and you can only be prepared when you practice. So, before you speak or do an interview, really assess who the reporter is, what the media outlet is, define the specific group of people who will be watching, listening, or reading the interview. And this will help tailor your responses to resonate with their interests, with their concerns, and their level of understanding so that you can make your messaging more impactful and relevant. And you can go to the next slide. Additionally, you will have the potential to reach an audience that you may want to reach, such as a potential partner or maybe a parent or guardian that hears about a Head Start and realizes that they could potentially enroll their child as a result. So it's not just the audiences that you want to reach, but be thinking about the potential audiences that can hear your message. And before an interview, you want to prepare the key messages you want to get across. What do you want your audiences to know or act upon? What is your key message? What is your call to action? You also want to anticipate unrelated questions, and I know that this can be challenging, but write out various scenarios, the curveballs that can come your way. Brainstorm a range of possible topics, and then practice concisely explaining those complex issues while staying aligned with your key messages. In this way, this will help build more confidence for you as you do the interviews, but also allow you to effectively communicate your main point. So those are the types of gotcha questions that you have to prepare for. And then my personal motto is anything you tell a reporter is on record. So they might say to you, okay, we're done with the interview, but I really want to know your thoughts on this, or don't worry, this is off the record. And I just feel anything you say, whether it's print, radio, TV, what have you, you're always giving yourself the potential to be quoted. So be really conscious about that. You also need to be conscious about controlling the narrative and media do's and don'ts. So you should be friendly to reporters, but remember that they have their own agenda. So do build the relationship with the reporter. Do know your materials, prepare your sound bites, translate your technical terms, your jargon, your acronyms. I used at Goodwill, I would often tell reporters, we help people facing barriers to employment. And a lot of media said to me, I don't know what that means. What are barriers? So just be thinking about that language and the terminology that you use so that it's understandable to media. Focus on your body language, especially when you are in a TV interview or a Zoom interview. Answer in full sentences. So someone might say, well, what is this program? You want to specify and say what the program is. Act as if the question won't be on air, because oftentimes it won't. They'll just have you speaking. So be conscious of that and prepare your full sentences. And if you have a PR lead, which I know some of you may not, do provide that contact information so they can follow up. I often say I'm the gateway. I'm the bad guy. I am able to help assess the basis of an interview and kind of be the go-between and also sit in on interviews. So I can be a partner of yours. And if you do have a PR lead, that is also helpful as well. The other thing is the don'ts. So don't go off record like we talked about. Uh, Saying no comment can be really detrimental for you. So try to think of other ways to phrase that without saying no comment. Don't guess or make up anything. I know you might feel like a deer in headlights if you're doing an interview and a question comes your way and you don't know the answer. It's okay to say, I have to get back to you. I need to research this. I will respond to you in about an hour, but I really need to look into this. Don't speculate. Again, that can be very damaging to you. Also with news outlets, you don't get the chance to see a read ahead copy. This isn't like a blog. They will not show you the interview before it runs. So you are not in a position where you can request to proofread things or ask that certain language isn't used. The only opportunity you have is if there is something completely false or inaccurate after a story runs, and you can then go back to the outlet, but you can't the only way you can try to control the narrative is in the verbiage that you're using. And again, don't be defensive or negative and avoid any buzzwords. One thing that I do is to prepare a media prep sheet, and all of you can do this. This is a good way to assess the media inquiry. So you can carefully evaluate the reputation of the media outlet, the journalist's agenda, who the journalist is, where they've worked before. You can even find online things about where they went to school. Tried to maintain that type of relationship and conversational tone with them. You also need to look at the relevance of the topic to your organization. The angle is always important. So I always ask, what is your deadline? What is your angle? Who else are you speaking with? You want to look at the potential audience reach, the desired format, and then think about the benefits or the risks of responding. So you can say, if you don't feel comfortable, I'm sorry, we don't have a spokesperson available for your immediate deadline. Or there might be a partner or another organization that does want to be on record, and you can refer the inquiry to them. So really assess if the inquiry aligns with your organization's goals and values before deciding to accept or decline or negotiate the request. There are characteristics of a great spokesperson, and that is they should be articulate, confident, knowledgeable about the topic, able to stay calm under pressure, be genuine and trustworthy, deliver clear messages in a concise manner, adapt to different audiences, and demonstrate good body language while effectively handling challenging questions. And I know that might sound like a lot, but again, I am willing to help you in preparing. Again, I'm a big proponent of a subject matter expert. So I think in the case of our organization, if there's something related to education, Dr. B would be a good person to answer those questions. You might have a human interest story, a parent or a guardian. they might be the best person, but you need someone to help train them and prepare them. So again, really think about who is the best spokesperson for the type of outlet that you're hearing from or you're trying to pitch. And most of all, make sure that that person is prepared. And I am here to help with that. So key messages are really important. Again, I will pause for a second and see if there's any questions. Okay, seeing none. To focus on your key messages in a media interview, you do want to identify a few concise, impactful points you want to convey and thoroughly prepare by anticipating questions, practice your answers, and then incorporate those key messages. Dr. B, I think you raised your hand.
Well, just because Christy didn't ask a question, but she did make a comment that
Oh,
might
okay.
be worth responding to, that
Yes.
their board discussed whether to initiate media inquiry about the shutdown. The downside being it probably won't change anybody's mind. The upside being it demonstrates community and awareness. And I can understand this dilemma. Do you have any comments for her about, do you make noise where there isn't any right now, or do you kind of like let things lie until you figure out what's in front?
That's a tough one. I think I would let things lie. Um, but in the case of proactive media, say there's an awareness month and a lot of media coverage is being out there broadcast about organizations that are comparable to yours. Uh, that's an instance where you can reach out and say, I know you cover this, but I did want you to be aware that we can be a resource or source to you on these types of stories or topics, and please feel free to reach out. But I think with knowing that we have a shutdown coming, I think there's just some unknowns, and I would probably get your plan together and your preparation and media lists, etc., and just be prepared for when the media comes to you. All right. So with key messages, we do want to be sure that you are always actively guiding the conversation back to your key points. And reporters are looking for simplicity. So some of the headlines might become your one quote. I often say that you should speak at a 5th grade reading level because reporters and journalists are just looking for the clear and simple facts. I do see part of the question if someone wants to read that for me.
Lauren's asking if you have advice on communicating tumultuous government goings on to staff internally. This is actually a good question. Like, how do you then keep everybody else sort of, business as usual as much as possible without freaking them out more? That's a really good question, Lauren.
Yes, so I have received a few requests for talking points, and I would be as transparent with internal staff, knowing what you know at this time as you can be with externals. So say staff, you had to furlough staff. How will you support those furloughed staff? How will you keep communication with them? How are you communicating to parents so that they know here's what could happen, but we're anticipating X and we don't think this will have major impact, but 6 weeks from now it may. So I can help with that, but I do think you should be actively communicating with your internal staff so that that leaves less opportunity for rumors or inaccuracies or just panic. So I hope that helps. All right. And the other thing I will say about key messages is just being short and concise when you're speaking to a reporter, because that enables them to ask follow-up questions. I've given this example before, but I had a spokesperson in a past life who would answer a question pretty much the same way, but then go on for several minutes. And if you are in a TV interview and you're trying to get across key messages, you have maybe 3 minutes if you're lucky. So just be conscious of keeping your key messages short so that you're kind of giving bait to the reporter, and then they can follow up with additional questions, and then you can get your key messages across. All right, next. I see one more comment.
John is asking about being in a really red district, and they're struggling with ways to begin conversations with our congressional leaders who aren't interested in Head Start. Work around them or try to open the doors. So I'm gonna let Lauren answer this, but I'm also gonna say, I don't know how hard this would be, John. But I think the best thing you can do is bring them into the program and let them meet your kids and your parents. And sometimes, yeah, I'm sure. Sometimes you have to think of really creative ways of making that happen. I think it would be great. This is a really nice group of people here. We have 152 people on this call. I can't imagine you're the only one who's struggled with getting a representative to come visit. If anybody on this meeting has had that experience and has some suggestions about how you kind of tip that invite and it opens the door at least a little bit. I think, some of the things I've shared with our team here about priorities for the current administration, the number one in education is parent choice. One of the beautiful things about Head Start is parents are so heavily involved. And that might be a hook that you could use to reach out and say, I know, school choice is something you care about. Come see the ultimate example of how parents help to lead their children's education. I think that's one of the things about Head Start that just struck me when I went from the school system into this program. It's so beautiful. And I think you could probably at least get some attention. It might work, and if you want to talk offline with me at all, you guys have my email, and I am happy to talk with you about this. I have some perspective, and I think there is more in Head Start that, we use red and blue as indicators. I'm not as crazy about that, but that's redder than you think it is. And you just have to think about what are the pieces of Head Start, local control. Parents are driving it. It is driving people out of being dependent on the government and being independently financially. These are all things that would resonate with someone in the current administration. You have to, use the right communication tools and language and things like.
I don't know if we just lost her, but I would just add to that you really have to meet them where they are. So if it's family values, if it's talking about we are building up a new society, people that will contribute back to society, that will be in your community and be in your local industries. So just think about what will resonate with them, meet them where they are. Using Goodwill as an example again, one thing that worked for us is that we had collectively more than 86% of the revenue from stores went right back into communities. And so that type of social enterprise framing really worked and appealed to people on both sides of the aisle. So those are ways that you can be thinking about that. But again, we can certainly help you with those talkers and that type of framing.
Lauren, if I could also just add
Yeah.
that the other thing that we've seen in the past work effectively to this question about when you have a member of Congress who's maybe not interested in engaging or reaching out. Persistence, to be totally direct, is one thing that has worked particularly well. And I also think that the other big area, as was being said, is find one or two of the issues that are really important to them, and focus that. I think there's I see Wanda throwing in the chat, and I think there's one example of a pretty conservative representative in Florida who went to go visit a Head Start program and eventually had been convinced to go visit the Head Start program. It took a little bit of work there, but and didn't and then when she was there, realized the connection that Head Start has with the foster care system and child welfare. And her husband, I believe, had been in the foster care system, and so this just really struck a chord with her. And it was one of those where it's like, oh, we should, that's research. Those are points that we can do in advance, and those types of through lines are really good opportunities. But again, members of Congress are busy. They have a lot of things that go on. But if you keep inviting them, every couple of months, maybe a couple times a year, it will happen. It might just take a little bit of time.
Great. And I see the comment about workforce discussions, and that's also, in fact, impactful. Okay, so types of questions. For a question you don't know the answer to, don't wing it. Like I said, don't speculate, don't try to guess. This will hurt your credibility. It's okay to say, I'm not the expert, I need to get back to you. Personal opinion. So sometimes reporters ask you about your personal opinion. Well, what do you think will happen with the shutdown? This can be very tricky, but remember, you're speaking on behalf of your organization. So don't fall into the trap of here's what I think versus what you need to say. And that's just not a position that you want to put yourself in. Third party. So you might get questions about a third party. And just remember, this is your airtime and you need to focus on your goals and your focus. So you're there to give your perspective. I would not try to speak on what you think the opposition says. You don't want to get baited into that. Don't talk about others. And don't give that precious time to someone else. So general tools, techniques, and tips. I always like to talk about the power of three. That is always helpful for people to remember. Three Musketeers, Three Little Pigs. It really works when you're trying to be quotable or you're trying to make a memorable soundbite in an interview. So in the case of Head Start, here's who Head Start is. Here's how we impact the local society. And here's how we help communities and society at large. So remember things in threes, and that will help you when you're trying to tell your story and when you're in the middle of an interview. Go to the next slide. Hopefully you can prepare for the easy questions. So yes, there are easy questions. And in that case, you can focus on what's the program or the message you want to get across. Why does it matter? Why should they care? What can they do? So think about, should they click on your website? Should they come to an event? Should they go somewhere to learn more about the program? This really helps people in terms of knowing what to do next, and then really understanding more about Head Start and providing those explanations. The other thing is, and this is my favorite, is there anything else you'd like to add? This is always a question, and I encourage you not to say, no, I'm good, thank you for your time. This is typically the soundbite that 9 times out of 10 is used. That's what you're quoted on in the interview. So if they ask you that, emphasize your key message point that you want to get across. It's okay to repeat that. Just think about what's the most important message that you want to get across at that moment in time. And then Q equals A plus 1. So this is not a cryptic math equation. This is an abbreviated way of saying that for every interview question, your answer should contain one of your key messages. This can be really helpful in a tricky interview situation. So for example, if a journalist is going off topic, use your key message to bring them back to the subject at hand. That should guide you, that should be your North Star, and that should keep you on track. These are just a few ways to be thinking about your control of the interview. And so this is something called bridging. And bridging in a media interview refers to a technique where you acknowledge a question, but then you smoothly transition the conversation back to the key messages. So you're taking control of the interview, you're ensuring the focus remains on hand, you're ensuring that you are conveying the points you want to get across, and that you are transitioning from an off-topic situation, a negative situation. You're really redirecting the conversation to the desired topic and really to your comfort zone. So this is the best way to have your art to the pivot. And we all do the pivot in our normal everyday lives. So you can practice this in your media interviews. I won't go through all of these. I could probably spend all day writing various bridging phrases, but a few examples are this means, or what it is important to understand. Let me provide some context. So again, these are all bridging phrases. Go to the next slide. So bridging in difficult circumstances, it's the same thing. You want to direct them back to what is the bigger point. I think what you're really asking is, or I can't speculate. So again, I can put together a cheat sheet for you on this, but these are some phrases when it comes to that. We can continue. Like I said, I could go all day with my bridging phrases, but there's 3 slides here that you will get. Transitions. So transitions are really important for topics that you can't speak about. And one would be proprietary non-public information. You might have a legal situation at hand. Avoid competitor bashing. So I use this with some of the state leaders. When I was at Goodwill, Goodwill's a for-profit, Savers a nonprofit. Savers is a for-profit. So Savers is giving a small percentage of the revenue back to the community, but both entities sell used goods. So they're both doing good in their own way. It's just they differ in terms of their organization structure. And you don't want to get in a situation where you are ever speaking negatively about someone else, especially someone that might be considered a competitor. Same thing with ongoing investigation or litigation. All you have to say is we are cooperating with investigators, with the police, with legal counsel, and leave it at that. You can even refer them to that appropriate party if you need to do so. Same thing with multi-part questions. You can answer the question that you need to answer, but you can refrain from answering the one that does not relate to the subject at hand. Hypothetical or forward-looking questions. You're not a fortune teller, so you can transition away from that. You can even say, I can't predict the future, but this is what I know. And some reporters, especially in a gotcha type situation, will try to repeat the question in a different way. So they'll reframe it, but essentially they're asking the same thing. You don't have to fall victim to that. You can continue to say, we're here to talk about X, and transition away from that question. Another technique is something called blocking. So that is where a spokesperson strategically avoids answering a question directly. So the difference between bridging and blocking, bridging, you're pivoting. Blocking is the art of saying no comment, but using phrases or statements to redirect the conversation back to a more favorable topic, essentially blocking the interviewer from getting the answers that they want. So again, it's a tactful way to answer the question without saying no comments. And then there is flagging or headlining. So flagging is where you are letting the reporter know the most important aspect of what you want to say. It is tactically controlling the conversation by assuring your messages are heard. So if you look back at executive or president interviews, President Obama always said, "Let me be clear." You often heard him say that in interviews. That was his version of flagging. And then we can go into the power of the pause, which is really important, especially now. So what I would encourage you is to be uncomfortable with the pause. Don't continue talking after you have said what you've needed to say. Use single, clear sentences and really just be comfortable with leaving that space because, again, reporters are trying to get you on filling that space and being uncomfortable. Again, you don't have to. So just pause, count to 3 in your head, smile, and let them move on to another question. And then post-interview, always send a thank you to the journalist. Always build that relationship. Be a source to them. If you're on social media, follow them on social media. Share the interview on your relevant social media channels, on your website, in your newsroom, if you have one. This is really important because oftentimes reporters are judged by the clicks that they're getting on a news story. So if it's online, anything you can do to help amplify that is really important. Monitor your media coverage for accuracy, like I mentioned, so ensure that everything is factual and accurate. And then be prepared to address any follow-up questions. So you might have a media story that is in a local media outlet, but is part of a larger entity and it gains traction. Be prepared for the types of requests or inquiries that you will get as a follow-up for that interview. In terms of interview tips, it's really important to focus on what you're wearing. I'm sorry, TV interview tips. So tape to air live. This is something that is a specific term that's used with broadcast outlets. So if you're doing a stand-up interview, if you're doing a Zoom interview, it's not always going to be a live interview. They might say, this is going to be on the 5 o'clock news this evening. This is when you have a chance to say, okay, I didn't feel comfortable with that one statement. Can I record it again? And oftentimes they'll let you do that. So know the format of an interview, know if it will be live, know if it will be taped, know if you will be on camera, or know if you will be on phone. Direct your answers to the reporter. So again, if you are in a live setting at an event and a reporter has the microphone, don't look at the camera, look at them. Enact a conversation. So you want to be sure that you are looking at them. Be sure to send any content to bring the story to life. So oftentimes you see on TV, there'll be a website, there might be some type of graphic. If you have that, or you could put that together really quickly, even if it's 3 tips, B-roll that you have, any kind of visual elements are really important to send and share ahead of time so that they can show that as you're speaking and as your interview is happening. Zoom interview tips. So make sure your light source is in front of you. You can find a ring light on Amazon. Use a clean background. If you have, I saw some of you have a virtual background, avoid that if you are doing a Zoom interview. And then make sure your camera is centered appropriately. Stack it up on books so it's level with your face. Make sure that you are looking at the camera as you're speaking so that it is very interactive and it does come across authentic.
And can you also ask your team to take pictures of you not in mid-sentence, but like while you're smiling or something instead?
I have seen that. What to wear? So clothes should be wrinkle free. I think that's obvious. Solid colors. I always tell people avoid wearing white. It does not look good on camera. If you're in studio, wear clothing with natural fibers because it can often get hot in a studio. Orange and reds are not always good because they can distract and they can actually draw negative attention. Same thing with loud, distracting patterns or stripes. So what works are solid colors, bold colors, dark colors, block colors, which are essentially two colors together, or neutral colors, like I mentioned here. Go to the next slide. So takeaways, I want you to focus on ditching corporate speak, speaking plain language, really be sure that you have speed to response, be responsive to media. They are often working very quickly. Be responsive to issues and crisis management situations. Build your base of advocates, your third-party allies who will speak on your behalf. Be sure that you are preparing and practicing for a media interview. So know what you're getting into, know the show's format, know the audience, and then prepare your crisis scenarios, the unexpected, the unanticipated questions, your 3 key messages, and most importantly, practice because you are all spokespeople and you all have the ability to do this. It just takes the time to prepare and practice. So with that, this is my contact information. This is how you can find me on social, and it's also in the chat. And I think we have about 15 minutes for questions.
Great. So go ahead and first of all, let's all give Lauren a big round of applause, even if she can't hear us from afar. Thank you, Lauren. I think this is some great comments, great suggestions, and really good information, I think. This is these slides will certainly come in handy. And as Lauren said, if there are specific, if you get calls from press, if you get calls from media and want some help, want some suggestions, things like that, please do reach out to us at NHSA, and we're here to help. Lauren, any tips for keeping our cool? Anything you can suggest on that?
I saw that. So I have been told that I always appear calm, and in a crisis situation, I will tell you I most likely am not, and I would equate that to think of a duck on water. They're smooth, they're graceful, but then underneath they're frantically, they're moving frantically. So I would say practice your breathing exercises. Just be prepared, know what you're getting into. Really try to equip yourself with your allies and practice with your staff, and just learn from, if something is not perfect, it's okay, but really go back and assess so that you know for the next time. And that pertains to a crisis situation where you can bring the crisis team back together again to evaluate, or if it's evaluating yourself, I always go back and look at my interviews or look at my speaking events so I can focus on what can I do differently next time?
I love that. I love that. Yasmina.
Yeah, I was just earlier we were talking, or people were talking about how you talk to the staff. And I think what you just said about looking calm on the surface needs to be. We as leaders cannot really show all of our feelings, the depth of them. And so there is the thing, yes, being authentic and not appearing cold and uncaring, but on the other hand, not increasing the anxiety. I don't know if any of you remember, we opened the Leadership Institute this winter with a presentation about the Shackleton expedition and how that group survived because of really deft leadership by Ernest Shackleton. You can sort of look it up. It's called The Endurance. There's a whole book about it. But it had to do with a measure of on one hand being as honest about the real threats, but at the same time also being honest about the whatever was mitigating and whatever was hopeful. So it's a difficult thing to be to seem calm when everything is roiling around you, but that's the task, and we all do it, to different degrees.
Absolutely. Thank you, Courtney, for dropping that in there. And thank you, Yasmina. That is such a good reminder from Luis's presentation on that. One question that came in, and I don't know, Lauren, if this is for you, if this is for other programs, but just how are other programs communicating the threat or potential outcomes of the shutdown to staff? I will just say, I think that it's in, the website that we have, the blog, excuse me, that we put together that outlines what shutdowns have looked like in the past, I hope is reassuring in a lot of ways. As I said at the beginning, it is likely that we're moving into a shutdown at this point. And it's unclear how long that's going to be. Could be a matter of hours, could be a matter of days, but that should not have much of an impact on Head Start programs and services in light of what we're hearing from agencies around receiving their grant funds for those that are April 1 grants. I believe that those funds are going out. That's at least what we've been hearing so far. And so I think that is, I mean, and Lauren, I'd welcome your thoughts on this too. One of the things that I've been kind of thinking a lot about is, and I think you and I talked about at one point, that when I do press interviews and have talked with folks, I'm always thinking about, as you said, the primary audience. Who am I trying to communicate this message to? But then I'm also thinking oftentimes about what might happen if Head Start parents or Head Start staff hear this type of message. And it's that kind of balance between wanting to sound the alarm without wanting to scare folks. And I think that that's something with this, that it ties into leadership training in general, right? Where it's such a delicate balance in some of those spaces. Lauren, any comments or thoughts that you could provide on that?
I would just say that's spot on. I mean, the communications should match, especially if you are, whatever we can anticipate at this time to tell parents, they're hearing that in real time, and then those interviews may follow. So you don't want that messaging to veer away from what you have communicated to parents. So it should be very parallel in nature.
Yeah. Christy shares here from Ohio that, it's important. Our staff has expressed such an appreciation for transparency. And I think that that's such a good point right now, that is like, especially in today's day and age when we have access to so much information. I actually was seeing a Facebook, I don't know if it was Facebook or Twitter, one of them, social media, post by one Democratic senator who had basically said he wasn't sure how to vote on this specific bill and was thinking about voting for cloture, but not voting for, but then voting against the bill. And everybody said, look, Senator, we know that that's just gimmicks. We know that what you're trying to say is you're trying to toe the line and weave an awkward thing. And we know that the result, what would happen with the results of this. I think that that's a good recognition that in the day and age that we're in right now, so many people have access to a lot of information. So especially when it comes down to potentials for a government shutdown, it's probably better to get ahead of that, right? I mean, and before it becomes a crisis, before it grows legs, and then it questions your leadership in a lot of ways. Yeah, thank you,
I
Michelle.
like Michelle's comment. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And that is such a good point. It is moving so fast that it's hard to keep up. It's hard to share all the right information.
and to really allow people to do their job with the children and families. I'd like to share what one of our former former board chairs said in a conversation with a member of Congress. He went to a very prominent member of Congress and asked him, what are you going to do? What can we do about Head Start? What is Congress going to do? And the gentleman said, and this is some of you may, if you're from South Carolina, know James Clyburn. He said, you do your job and Congress will then do their job. So this is what with your leadership and being transparent and reassuring people that they know what there is to know, that they can continue to do the work with the children and the families.
Yeah, thanks, Yasmina. Question from Aaron around future NHSA conferences, such as the Innovation Summit or others still planned, and will media topics be discussed for future contexts? What is the number of people that can register? So the Innovation Summit is a little bit of a different flavor. I don't think we spend as much time talking about kind of the media type approach, communication approaches, but the Leadership Institutes, absolutely. We've included topics around this in the past, and we will moving forward. The next one is the Fall Leadership Institute, which I believe it has a cap of around 600 folks for that. Our national conference, which I don't actually know if there's a cap on it, so challenge everyone to try to sell it out in Columbus, Ohio. That one's coming up very soon. Starts the day after Head Start's 60th birthday on actually technically 2 days, May 20th, May 19th, May 20th, and that conference, I believe that there are some communications topics being planned. We're also open to suggestions around what types of topics and trainings that you would like. I should also add, before we run out of time, I would really love if anybody has suggestions on what we might want to try to do for our April Leadership in Turbulent Times webinar. We have not planned it yet. We have a couple ideas, but if there's things that you think would be helpful, trainings that you would want to hear us or you would want to receive from us and things of that kind, just let us know. Drop it in the chat here, email Dr. B, email myself, whichever, and that would all be helpful. The last one, thank you, Courtney, is our Leadership Education and Development Summit, which registration, I believe, just opened up for that. That is going to be in the summer. And there's a number of topics that we do cover. I don't know if we have media planned for this year or anything on that front, but I know that agenda is still being developed and coming together as well. Thank you. June 24th to 26th. It is virtual, and we do encourage not just single folks from programs to come, but frankly, both our senior staff as well, a whole team to come to the type of an event and really join together to figure out how they want. I mean, I think the summer is always a perfect time when there's a little bit of a lull, unless you're in an early Head Start program, but there's a little bit of a lull to be able to get in there and do some kind of team planning all together as it's connected to the Virtual Leads event that we do as well.
Tommy, I'll just chime in for the May conference. I am planning a pre-con. It's not live on the website, but that will be scripted and live in a few weeks. So to come.
Excellent.
And
I heard
Joyce's
rumor of that
comment
one,
is,
but I didn't know if that was ready for prime time. So I'm glad to hear that.
That is now.
Joyce's comment is very interesting, and it kind of reminds me, you know, at our leadership institutes, a lot of times you will do exactly that. Not so much a representative, but a lobbyist.
Yep.
And they talk about the different perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Debbie, that you know, that at the end of the day, and I think this, please disagree with me if you think so, Lauren, but at the end of the day, I think that this applies to both members of Congress as well as journalists. is that
Mhm.
it's really important to remember they're people too. They're humans too, right? And being able to interact with them, even though you're used to probably seeing the TV persona, being able to interact and kind of connect with them. And oftentimes, I think really good, especially if it's on a live TV or an in-person journalism thing. A lot of journalists are really good at making people feel calm and feel and kind of being able to get them to ask questions. That silence thing, they do that all the time. I can attest to that, as well as that anything else you want to add, and I'm always like, yes, that's my chance for my soundbite. And so that always happens. That type of thing always goes. But they're humans just like us, and so it's always nice to build a little bit of a relationship. Ask them early on, especially from Head Start, oh, do you have kids of your own? And if they do, remember that, follow up on that. You know, they'll be impressed, they'll love that, it'll feel good, and a good way to strengthen a relationship long term. Ooh, Shanda, good question. Many of our elected officials are doing virtual or phone town halls. If we have the opportunity to ask one question, what should that be? Let me think about that, and I'm going to report out at the we'll report out at the stand-up call on Monday. I love that question. I mean, I think that there's always some stuff that we can do, and I think always anything referencing, you know, Head Start. I frankly always love the question of, have you visited a Head Start program recently, and do you want to come soon? Is always a good one. But with some of the town halls, I know they want it to be a little bit more policy focused. And so let our team do a little bit of brainstorming on that, and I will have an answer on Monday's not town hall, excuse me, Monday's stand-up call as well. And Shanda, if you have a town hall before then, just shoot over a note and we'll get back to you before then. All right, any last question for Lauren before we wrap up?
I got a question about this recording. We'll be sending it out just for everybody's information, so you will have it.
Great. Well, that is a classic way to end a conference. Yes, you will get information about this afterwards. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. We had such a great group today. And again, let us know how we can continue to support you. More than anything else, though, I just want to end by saying, first of all, a big thank you to Lauren for spending your time, and on day 12 already doing your second webinar for over 100 people here. And really, above all else, though, this is the last thing I want to end on. Just a big thank you to all of you leaders who are out there. It is a tough time to be a leader, period. It's a tough time to be a leader in Head Start. It's a tough time to be in Head Start right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things changing. But know that you got a community that has your back. We're all in it together. We're running into the same challenges. Let us know how we can support you and keep doing the great work that you and your staff do. Thank you all so very much, and have a great weekend, unless we talk to you before then.